Hey, what's happening? Before we jump into the show, I wanted to see if you had any music on a hard drive. You have a band, you have a project, and you want to self-release your own music. Well, there's an easy way to do it. You can go to distrokid.com/VIP/hyphenate and go get your music up on all the streamers. You keep 100% of your royalties, and you can get 30% off by using this code. It's a great, easy way to get your music up on the streamers and share it with your fans, your friends, your family, your mom, your dog, everybody. Everyone wants to hear it. But go to distrokid.com/VIP/hyphenate, HYPHENATE, and send me the link. I want to hear it too. Send your mom the link. Send your dog the link. They all want to hear it too.
That to me is like the most special part of being in Providence. It was like there was just stuff going on all the time. Different groups to hang out with. There was the music scene. There was going to studio. There was films being played all the time. Like it was just like a for the type of personality that I have, which is like pretty energetic and very social. It couldn't have been better.
What's happening? Thank you so much for tuning into Hyphenate with me, your host, Randy Randall. On today's show for February 27th, I'm very honored to welcome artist Sebastian Blanck onto the show. We had a great talk, which you will hear in just a few minutes. But we talk about Providence, Rhode Island, early days in black dice, abstraction, painting, and, the whole creative sort of rigmarole. Excuse me. It was really great to sit down and catch up with Sebastian and rehash the old days and the current days and the new days. Hope everybody's doing well out there. I had a fun 44th birthday this past weekend. It was great. Got to go to Vegas and see Penn and Teller, who I had no idea were doing this thing for 50 years. They had a great montage of photos and memories of their long career. How fun. It'd be great. It'd be incredible to interview Penn Jillette. I don't think Teller really does interviews. Maybe he does. He's sort of the non-speaking one. I always just remember loving Penn and Teller whenever I saw them on TV or on Comedy Central or on any talk shows or anything when I was a kid. They made such a huge impression on me, those early 80s sort of bits and things they did, because they always just seemed a little bit more dangerous, a little scarier, and a little bit more honest. As musicians, that wasn't like a big, like silly thing with like tuxedos and doves and new age music suspense. Their thing always seemed more akin to like punk, and kind of like cutting edge and more in your face and a little bit more scary and more fun. And I'd never seen him live, so I was really excited to be able to cross that off my list of things I've done and performers I've seen in Vegas. It got me thinking and reminiscing. I remember I had to look it up, but it was 14 years ago in 2011. I took my then girlfriend, now wife, Shannon, to Vegas to see Don Rickles. I couldn't believe that he was still playing even then. I remember it seemed like, what? This is crazy. He's still playing live in Vegas. So I dragged her out to the desert and to see him, and I was so stoked. Got called on stage and got to participate in some joke or something, and she snapped some photos, and it was really funny this time being out in Vegas now 14 years later for the Penn and Teller show. They asked if anybody was having a birthday in the audience, and it was really funny. I went with my cousin and his wife and my wife, and they all pointed at me like, it's his birthday. And so they pulled me on stage. I got to wear a big birthday, hat, cone birthday hat, and Teller came out and threw confetti in my face, and I had to hold a card, and it was this big elaborate volunteer trick where I'm holding a card. I pick any card I want out of the deck, and I'm holding it up, and then they pick somebody else out who was from LA. They pick all these people who have, commonalities or something. It was fun. But they've been at the Rio for 25 years. They first started performing at this theater in this show in 2000, I think. I read somewhere, and so it's wild. I mean, it was really a lot of fun and a good way to spend a birthday. But I hope everyone else is doing well. Hope you're hanging in there. It's that second month of the year, almost coming to a close, and getting ready for March. Hopefully you're staying warm. Yeah, Vegas was beautiful. It was great weather. It was like 70 degrees. It wasn't too hot. It didn't feel like a blazing desert. It was kind of mild for the middle of winter. Got to walk around in short sleeve shirts, maybe a light sweatshirt was all you needed. So it's good. I hope if you're somewhere that's freezing, I hope you're staying warm. If you're somewhere where it's warm, I hope you're staying cool. Yeah, a lot of fun. Don't forget, send me your demos, hyphenate@gmail.com. Send any demos or band names. I want to see them. I want to review them. I want to see what you got going on. If you're looking to put music up online, you can Hyphenate and put your music up there now. All right, now to my interview with Sebastian Blanck. Here we go. Sebastian, thank you so much for coming on Hyphenate. How you doing, man?
Hey, Randy. Thank you for having me. I'm a fan of No Age, and I've been listening to a lot of the podcasts, so it's great to be on. Pretty cool.
You've been an early supporter. You were nice enough to reach out.
well, when I heard the whole Providence thing, I think part of my personality is like I was psyched to hear all my old friends talking about this, and then I was like, I want to get in on that.
Wait a second. They didn't remember, right? I know it was something. It was kind of an experiment. That was last year. I think last January I did a Providence, Rhode Island month, and it was kind of thought of like, okay, if I could, because I think I talked to a few people, and I was like, oh, if I just talked to a few more, I could make a whole like block of this.
Yeah.
But again, like anything, there's never really a definitive answer. There's kind of an oral history in a lot of ways.
Sure.
And as soon as you talk to one person, you realize you've left out 100 other people. But but for more or less, it was my own edification or my own sort of like curiosity, to try sort of drive this thing of like, what were things that were influential or impactful to me, and how can I sort of like document, whatever the best I can. And I think it's interesting that a lot of that time hasn't really been catalog or lionized like other scenes. I think within that, like within a 20-year period from the 70s to the 90s, CBGB's, Max's Kansas City, all of this stuff was, by that point you had things like Rolling Stone, you had infrastructures of journalism and music journalism specifically that sort of took up the mantle of like, oh, we are going to talk about the 70s in New York. This is going to be full documentaries, books, multiple magazines, cover stories are written about this thing. And in my mind, it's like, if I were, that type of music journalism doesn't really exist like in that form anymore. But things like podcasts like this might be the closest thing we have. And I was like, well, I'm going to throw my flag down here, and I want to know more about this time in this scene.
That's awesome. I feel like it's funny because in some ways, one of the things that was unique about the Providence scene is I don't think there was much ambition for like a commercial success. Everybody was like, we're here to make music, and we're really going to explore the sort of like farther out version of what music can be, and maybe even more abstract. So I think like you look at CBGBs, you look at Max's Kansas City, or even like Greenwich Village in the 60s, there's so much the commercial side of that added to like the weight and importance of that material, even though like that isn't necessarily translatable to what was happening in Providence. I think it wasn't intentional, but it probably has kept the investigation of it pretty limited, because nobody's like, it's not pop music, it didn't hit mass culture. So the people who were there, or people who, were going to indie shows and punk shows that might have seen one of the bands that started in Providence, it's amazing that anybody cares at all,
Right. Yeah. Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was a hum behind me. It's interesting you say that, because I guess, it sort of mirrors though in the overall, just music distribution, music, commercial music in general, like it's changed so much in these 20 years. You know what I mean? Like the ability to sell records is not what it was at the time either. So it almost becomes in my mind, it's a moot point to even like if this was commercial or if this was this, because there's no real commercial music. You know what I mean? There is only the only music.
Well, there's
that makes
one
money is pop
level,
music.
and it's there's one level of commercialism, and it's like Billie Eilish Taylor Swift, and everything else is just like getting pennies for streams.
Right. And I think that was, but that like all things, there was like any kind of punk scene or the sort of stuff where it was, there's more of a document of a youth movement or of a creative movement in some ways. And I think art being sort of the key, or an art school with an art practice, being the base of that, really sort of sets the tone, for a lot of the musicians and artists, who are literally going to school to learn about art. And again, where is there commercialism in art? You know what I mean? It kind of mirrors more that sort of scene where there's maybe a handful of blue chip artists that operate at any one time. And, another 100,000 artists who are anywhere from craft folk art to, mid-sized galleries.
Yeah. I think that also, like, I know loads of people who were involved in the Providence scene in the 90s, including people like Hisham, who have tons and tons of documentation, either like video footage or photography. And there's a certain, like, if there is a documentary in place, let's say, there's a budget to then edit that stuff or go through and develop some of those old rolls of film that have not been looked at or touched for ages. But I've talked to Hisham so many times about this. I'm like, we have to figure out a way to get you some money so you can develop like 200 rolls of film and put out a book of not only like what we were doing in Providence, but what was happening in Brooklyn, and then what was happening for the Dice on the road, including when I was there, but especially after. Because they were touring with, like legit, like pretty big indie bands. So I think it's a funny thing because it seems like there would be an audience, but getting the funding to even allow that audience to have an object or material to come to is like one of the stumbling blocks, I think.
It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, you almost need some kind of a benevolent, underwriter, a Patreon, but a patron of some sort, who sort of grew up with this or has discovered it, or their son or daughter or somebody is
totally,
you did if like Phil Knight from Nike's son wasn't if he was into, noise music instead of clay animation,
Oh, is that what he's in? I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah. No, his son runs a like anything that isn't Tim Burton that's clay animated. That's him. It's Travis Knight's son. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, something like that, right? I don't know, but I think barring any large amount of money, that some of it, I think at least having these conversations around it, because it was something that and I think it was clear. Hopefully, it came out of those 4 conversations I had last year. That RISD scene was at least for Dean and I and our sort of scene was like a watershed sort of moment. You know what I mean? There was stuff that just those Lightning Bolt records and the tours and seeing them, and like what that impact that had on the smell and where we were in those early aughts was just monumental. And it was a lot of what, like, okay, well, if they can do this, or there's this that exists out there, there was like something to shoot for, some kind of sense of cacophony and expression. There was like, okay, there is a blueprint of sorts, or at least there is a something to shoot for and a goal to aim at.
Right.
Which I think,
it's a blueprint, really, but it's crumpled up and probably thrown in the back, in the garbage.
Yeah. But I feel like I was definitely an acolyte or a result of that, and I think what Dean and I did, as we started No Age, we knew what we wanted to some degree, but we had, we were standing on the shoulders of a lot of that, of a lot of those experimentations, or, these sound collages of those, Black Dice records like Beaches and Canyons or Ride the Lightning, and these sort of the Lightning Bolt record. And, there was a lot of stuff we did.
I think that I actually was I didn't play at the first Dice show at the Smell, but I was there. Because the first tour that they, went on without me when Aaron joined the band, I was like, wait a second, I kind of wanted to do some of this. So I got a plane ticket and I met them out west. And I think I so I was really on the first 4 tours, but I only played on the first 3. And I basically I don't think I even did any merch because I was just like too busy hanging out and having fun. And I was like, it's your band now. You guys have the responsibility of doing this.
I'm just
But
here as a
yeah, so I
fan.
was at the Smell and for their first show, and then was also in San Francisco, and they played with Eraserata. And
Oh,
I think
cool.
we went to a couple other cities, but I can barely even remember which was the tour that I was playing on and which was the tour that I was just like hanging out.
Do you remember who else was on the Smell bill that night?
I don't at all, which probably means I missed most of it.
I know. I'm trying to think. That would have been probably 2001 or 2000.
Yeah,
No.
I think 2000, and it was probably 2000 or 2001. Probably
Wow.
2000, because I think it would have been before Beaches and Canyons. And there was a little bit of like, I think they did one release on Troubleman.
Okay.
Or Troubleman Records. That was like the thing after, which I think a couple of songs that I'd like played on or helped write initially were on that, but then it all, it changed. And
it goes into the gristle.
Yeah.
Yeah, but tell me a little bit about. Let's start at the beginning. Where do you come from, and how do you sort of come to art, and how did this happen?
Sure. So I grew up in my family kind of moved around quite a bit, but most of my childhood and where I think of my childhood being was in Baltimore, Maryland. And I grew up right near MICA, which is the art school there. It was like 2 or 3 blocks away from our house. And when I was in like kindergarten, I think my mom, who hadn't finished college, went back to school. She went to MICA for college, and she would take me around the art school I was in kindergarten, and I would sometimes have like if I had a short like half day or something, she'd to her class with her, and I would just like sit in the corner and draw. And I was just from that moment on, I was like, oh, this is what I need to do. I don't need to worry about learning my alphabet. I need to learn about like drawing and painting and all this sort of stuff. So I spent after schools taking classes there, summers taking classes there, and my mom had a studio in our house. So that is being a part of like normal everyday life has always been an idea that she really set for me. And my parents were both very encouraging about my passion for art making, but they were also super nervous about the idea of me being an artist because they didn't want me to become like a depressed, poor drug addict or something, which is like the stereotypical version and sometimes real version of what happens. So grew up in Baltimore, and then at a certain point moved to Brooklyn when I was a teenager, and went to a private school in Brooklyn, which had art classes. That was the first time that I really had in-school art classes that were of any level of sophistication. And the teacher there, a guy named Ken Rush, was really, really supportive, and he's the one who kind of pointed me in the direction of going to RISD. So I applied to go to MICA, and I applied to go to RISD, and at some point, I think I was talking to an old friend from Baltimore, and he was like, well, if you go to MICA, then we can get an apartment and live together. And I was like, I mean, that sounds kind of cool, but it also sounds sort of shitty. Like, I've already done this, I've already been in Baltimore for so long. And I was like, is that the guy that I want to hang out with? Even though he's a perfectly nice guy, it just felt a little bit,
you'd been on
not
that
a
road
step
before.
forward.
Yeah. It wasn't
exactly.
an exploration.
Right. So went to RISD, and I'd met Bjorn and, another really good friend of ours named Jason Rothenberg, who's a photographer who actually worked on the Gore book with the Dice, and did a lot of photography for them. And the three of us became very close friends. And even when Bjorn was, so like our senior year, was still in Maine, we were talking on the phone constantly, like being like, how are we going to get maybe Bjorn didn't have this problem as much as I did, but I was like, how am I going to get my grades high enough so I can graduate and actually go to RISD? And, luckily I made it through, and Bjorn and I were really like rooting each other on, and then became roommates our freshman year.
How did you meet Bjorn?
So Bjorn and I were in this pre-college art program at RISD between junior
Okay.
and senior year of high school, and we were in a sculpture class together, which wasn't really like a natural fit for me exactly, because I was always more into 2D drawing, and but I wanted to see what that was like, and we, bonded over dumb shit like stupid movies and music and like watching sitcoms over and over and over again. So it
Oh,
was a lot of
funny.
just like, talking about the general bullshit and pop culture stuff of the day.
That's cool. So you met during that high school program between junior and
Yeah,
senior year, and then it was like, okay, that now the goal's set. You want to go there. This was
exactly.
you saw the
Exactly.
future. Wow,
Yeah.
that's
And
cool.
it was, like even when we were there in high school, there was a sense that like you could really kind of take over the town. Like not that we were trying to, it's just there was nothing going on there. It was really quiet. There were
Yeah,
already bands
Providence.
playing and
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah, but it was like I always think of Providence as being a perfect place for an art school because it's basically like a after 5 p.m. the whole downtown shuts down, or at least that's what it was like when we were there. So that's why all these warehouse spaces that everybody was putting shows on, or even like random bars downtown, there was just nobody else there to do anything. So we could kind of set the tone and be bad in a way that was really fun and I think led to a lot of exciting times for all of us.
but that late '90s, early 2000s was really sort of that. Providence was like many towns, post-industrial, sort of, post now, the new NAFTA sort of
Sure.
whatever,
Yeah.
the Clintonian, put all the manufacturing overseas and warehousing and all
Right.
this stuff. So it's sort of one of many cities that sort of had this infrastructure of a industry that no longer existed there.
Totally.
And
totally.
then you so that kind of makes those warehouses, real estate, sort of land and space,
Incredible spaces,
super
and like
cheap.
super cheap. And like I said, like I know there were police there, but they rarely had anything to do with us. Like there were probably, I bet, if all the people that went to shows at Fort Thunder or any of the other spaces where stuff was going on, the number of times that things got shut down because it was too noisy or whatever, I can only remember one. And I think it wasn't even a show. It was like one of the wrestling. And that was at the point where
the
there was
wrestling matches.
Yeah, where there was probably like 500 people there, and somebody called because it was just like freaky and way too many kids.
That's so wild. Yeah, but and then inserting this sort of hotbed of creativity and youth of an art school like RISD into this sort of matchstick house of warehouses and things, and then also a sort of disaffected local culture as well, whose parents probably worked in these industries and now are out of work, and the kids of that generation, like a John Dwyer or totally. these other sort of folk. I think that was one thing that talking to Joel, sort of demonstrated, whereas it was the immigrated, art students, and then the disaffected sort of locals. Sort of, this was the real time there was a big crossover and sort of, empowered or somehow bonded over this type of loud art rock music.
Yeah, I think that it's funny because Baltimore, in a lot of ways, feels like Providence. Mm-hmm. They're both exactly that type of city, where they had like shining moments. And then after that shining moment, it's always been a bit of like, how do the people who live here make money? Like, what's the industry, whatever. I think that Providence has a better reputation than Baltimore does in general. But both are like awesome places with,
oh my God, yeah,
kind of quirky artistic cultures as like a big part of what the identity of those places are.
Yeah, Baltimore's had a huge art music scene as well. People like Dan Deacon totally. Coming out of there, and Beach House.
And I mean, all the Animal Collective guys were.
Oh,
there
right,
too.
Of course, yeah.
And that's actually like, do you know the band Yesayer?
Of course, yeah.
Yesayer, Chris, I used to babysit him when he was a kid at the local pool that we both belong to. And like, there's just
What a small
a
world.
lot of, exactly. And a lot of like excitement over just making or figuring out a way to make shit happen. But I think that the sort of, I don't know if I was that aware of the sort of like town gown kind of dynamics. Like Dan St. Jake's, who was in Landed, I think he recorded the first version of the Dice performance, and when we or the first like tape that we did, and the really early days when I was hanging out with Bjorn, kind of before Fourth Thunder was happening, we were freshmen. We were going to see this band, Small Factory, which was like an indie band, and they were just about to break up. So they were playing like all these shows in support of a record that they were just about to release, but also like, I guess, sort of celebrating their demise in a way. So that was like the first, at least like semester, maybe even year, we were going to like all these indie rockers who were a little bit older than us. They seemed old, but they were probably like 25,
Yeah.
like I don't know how old they were. But, and then Dave Achenbach, who played guitar in Small Factory, who was so local to Providence, recorded our 7 inches that we put out on Gravity and Vermin Scum. So we kind of, I would never say that I was like fitting in with the townies or something, but there was already like a dynamic where if you're in the music scene and there's gonna be locals who are playing music, and that I think is really like great way to bring those two communities together.
Yeah, it was a crossover, sort of allowed everybody the permission to mingle in a way that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Yeah. And I mean, I like was talking about or was in Six Finger Satellite for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And I've met a couple of those guys in Providence. When we were in Providence, those guys were fucking scary. Like I'd had no interest. I went to their shows and like it was pretty awesome, but I had no like I didn't have the balls to go hang with them. They were super intimidating.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so then you go to RISD from New York and you're living with, and then how soon does Black Dice start from there? Or how does that sort of come together?
So I was basically trying to get a band together from the second I got to RISD.
And had you played music before? Was that something you'd had in high school and prior to that?
I have been I think I got my guitar when I was 16. So I was playing, on my own, trying to just like figure out this mysterious object. And then basically we're like, I'd play with it a little bit, put it down. And then actually Bjorn's roommate, Jason, who I was talking about earlier, had a guitar in his room. So one of the reasons why I would go hang out with them was because the guitar was in there. And I would just go in there and like kind of mess around. And Jason taught me a few chords, or more than I already knew. And when that program was finished, Jason was also from New York. So he and I started a band called Edith Pressler, which we released I think we released one like tape on a label called Ketchup Plate. I don't know. Do you know Rob Carmichael?
No.
So Rob Carmichael went to school with Jason at Swarthmore, and he started this label Ketchup Plate, which was sort of like modeled after like Shrimper and Singing Eunuchs and those like tape labels that were, pretty prominent for super nerdy indie kids at the time. So he was trying to do that, and they put out a tape of ours. So every time I'd come home from Providence, Jason and I would meet up and we'd spend like all night working on the 4-track and, probably like the worst songs, but fun, and like hours and hours of just like having a good time. And the product was not necessarily that reflective of how much fun we were having, but it was still, a cool thing that we felt relatively good about. And so I played a bunch of shows with Jason over the years at Swarthmore, and then was also going back and forth trying to find bands to play in Providence. and I think I was in like 3 or 4 bands before like Black Dice came into being. I even played in a band with Eric. That was just the two of us. Eric from Black Dice before Black Dice was a thing, and we just played a couple like joke shows, and it was all stupid songs that I was writing about. I don't know, getting wasted. It wasn't very sophisticated stuff, sort of punkish. And then at a certain point, when Bjorn finally got a guitar and was playing, I was like, if you're starting a band, I am going to be in that band. Like you can't tell me I wanted to be in a band. And we're like, we live together. We're super close friends. This is happening. So the 3 of us started trying to figure out how to make that work. And it went through a bunch of different iterations. Like, I think Eric was on drums for a little while. I played organ for a little while. It was a lot of experimenting. And then finally Bjorn started writing these like weird sort of aggressive, I don't even know what to call them, like hardcore-ish, noisy songs. And we were playing with, Brian Gibson was playing drums with us for a little while from Lightning Bolt.
Mm-hmm.
And that was hard because he was so busy with Lightning Bolt, because Brian Chippendale's like work ethic is, or at least was at the time, like practice every single day. So getting Brian to come was pretty challenging. So that's when we asked Hisham to join.
Amazing.
So I think it took about a year of maybe even a little bit longer of playing with some version of the 3 of us before we then added Brian and then added Hisham after Brian was it just didn't fit for him.
Yeah. And Hisham had played in Lightning Bolt as well at some point. So it was
Hisham
kind
had
of
played in Lightning Bolt
of members.
Exactly.
Like, okay, yeah. You stick to there.
And I think like all of us were also in like 3 other bands. Everybody was that to me is like the most special part of being in Providence. Was it was like there was just stuff going on all the time. There was different groups to hang out with. There was the music scene. There was going to studio. There was like, films being played all the time. Like it was just like for the type of personality that I have, which is like pretty energetic and very social. It couldn't have been better.
It's incredible. And that's really what you want, I think, from an arts education or from, an art school sort of experience, is really that full court 365 press of just like, okay, this is all the art happening all the time. And it's just up to you how much, you can sort of take, because that's sort of where you define your style and sort of get exposed, almost like a fire hose blast to the face of art.
Totally.
That's what I would want. At least, I think a lot of my college experience was like that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in what I was studying, but just everything else I was doing, while I wasn't in class. I was riding my bike down to the Smell and going to every art show there was to go to. And there was, 6 different parties every weekend, and
sounds awesome.
Something to do, right? Yeah, exactly. I know. Here we are many years later than that. That would kill me if I go out to one thing every other month, and I'm just like, oh God, I need to get some sleep.
That's sleep. The other thing too, is it's like it was all so close. It wasn't like LA is so spread out.
Yeah.
New York is like, can be very complicated to get one place to the other, especially if you're going into like deep Brooklyn or Queens or something. But I don't have the convenience, and the fact that it was all built into this one like relatively small area was like made all those things possible, because you could go see multiple shows in the same night. There'd be like a club show, and there would be like a warehouse show. I used to walk around with I don't do it anymore, and I probably did it for many years after I really needed to, but I used to have my earplugs in my little like change pocket all the time.
So you never knew when a loud show would break out.
That's right. And I think it took me probably like 15 years of really not needing that to stop doing it.
Give it up. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I still keep guitar picks in that little coin pocket.
Totally. Yeah.
9 times out of 10, 9 days out of 10, I'm not using them. But then that time, let me send this one.
I actually don't have one today, which is weird. But I almost have it there as like a talisman or like a good luck charm. I'm just like, I gotta have that, or
rabbit's
it's gonna
foot.
go wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah,
If I don't
exactly.
have some orange Tortex in my pants, something's.
Yeah.
I have a great story about that with when my wife and I were dating. I was like, we got to go see Don Rickles in Las Vegas. I had a feeling I was like, this isn't gonna, I'm a fan of old comedy and kind of love that old Hollywood
He's hysterical.
stuff. And so she didn't know who he was or didn't really care. But again, we were in love, and she's like, okay, I'll follow this crazy guy to Vegas. Let's go, or I'll go with him. So we went, and I bought front row tickets. They weren't that expensive. He was playing off the strip at a smaller hotel. It wasn't like it was a huge, hard to get in show. And so I got his front row tickets, and then he's picking on people, like as he does, and making fun of people. Right. And so he called me up on stage. And this was sort of at the height of No Age. We were touring all the time and doing stuff, and I kind of dressed up a little bit, my best black pants I could find, and a button-up shirt or something. And he asked me what I do, and I said, "Oh, I'm a guitarist." He's like, "You got a guitar pick?" And I'm like, sure. As I reach in, I happen to have one, and then I give it to him, and he gives this look to the audience, like, "Oh, great! Now what am I going to do with this?" And he goes back, and he has a whole like, I don't know, 16-piece orchestra or 20-piece orchestra, and he goes back over there and gives it to the conductor. He's like, "Oh, okay, now this guy, what am I going to do with this?" But I was just like so taken aback. Like, Don Rickles is making fun of me for being a guitar player, but I'm glad I had a guitar pick on me to prove it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's so cool.
It was wild.
That's the best way to have one of those experiences, is to be a party to it and get to be the victim in the best way possible.
It was great. And then after that, I sat back down, and he made me do something racist on stage, and made me the butt of the joke or something. Everything was good natured, but everything, of course, would not fly in today's culture.
Totally.
But then
I
go
funny, though.
Sit back down, and then they have the concierge or the usher comes over with a bottle of champagne that has his caricature on it. They put a sticker across the thing, and so I retook it, and and so it was a really nice. Thanks for being a good sport and for letting me make fun of you on stage.
Cool.
And gave us this bottle of champagne with his face on it, and I kept that for years.
That's so classy. He'd be like, "I'll make an ass out of you, but here you go."
There you go. Thanks for coming up on stage and being part of the show. It was wild. But just that energy of that time, and that time of life, and just going to 2 different shows and a night, and just everywhere you walked, there was something happening. What in reading some of the writings, that you do and you share, you talk about a particular black eye situation. That was sort of, was that the clear bell getting rung that you think maybe this band isn't the band for me, or this isn't a lifestyle I can continue to lead?
I feel like maybe it has to do with this, the slow functioning of my brain. It took me a little bit more than that.
Well, tell that story, or kind of talk about some of those really black dice shows for the people who weren't there. I mean, this is part of what made the legend grow of Providence. It was, not only the shows, but you play maybe once a year or every other year, to tour, but the word on the street, or the word online, or the word, however word got around, was black dice shows were particularly crazy and violent. And
I mean, I really do think that in some ways, and I'll tell the whole story, but I just want to preface it with this idea, is that what we were doing when it was in Providence, it was really the language of that city and that scene. And somehow we didn't understand that if we took that other places, people would think that was crazy. And Lightning Bolt is definitely touring, and there might have been 1 or 2 other Providence acts that were touring, but Bjorn was super ambitious, right away, and not in a money making, this is going to be $1 million opportunity. More we're here, we're in a band, let's get on the road, let's see what this is about. So when we would play shows in other towns, we would just do it the way other bands in Providence were playing, and the way that we played in Providence. That often was either seen as being the most exciting thing that could happen, or we were assaulting people, or kind of being crossing the line. And I really do think that we probably did cross the line, but it was meant to be fun. And I think that Eric and sometimes myself were the of the band were the 2 that got hit and hurt the most. So in the case of this show where I got hit in the eye, it was actually at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And
a good medical school, which is
a good medical
relevant.
school, exactly. Yeah. And my memory of it, I think, is a little bit different than what I've since been told by everybody else in the band. Like, I thought we played the whole show, like this was it, like this is our last song. But last time I talked to Hisham, who I talk to still fairly frequently, he said that it was like the first song. And I was like, what are you talking about? We played the whole fucking set. And it might as well have been the whole set, because our sets were like 10 minutes long. Like we were playing super short sets. I don't know exactly what happened other than Eric, who had a tendency to like either throw things or knock things over or push people around, swatted at a beer bottle that was on one of the amps, and it flew and it hit me in the cheek. And I just basically I don't know if I got knocked out. I just got knocked down. And he said that he came over to me and was kind of on top of me. What he said, I said was, if I can't see, I can't paint, which is so like, in some ways I'm like, that's the best thing I could have ever said. And I'm glad I chose to be a painter and save my eyes. But it's also like the nerdiest fucking thing you could say in that moment. But yeah, he kind of like helped me like get up, and then we went out. The show was over. Everybody applauded. I'm not sure why. And then some medical student from Johns Hopkins was sitting with me and told me that if I went to the ER and got stitches, then I would actually have like a much worse scar than if I just let it heal up. And then I think we all went to go see Dead Moon play that night. And I was fucking miserable. Like, it was at the Auto Bar, and I just sat on the street and kind of maybe had a beer or maybe didn't have a beer, was just like, I can't believe that I have to sit here like this and wait for everybody else to enjoy this show so I can crash out. But it was also right that either like the week or like I just started dating the person who is now my wife. And I was like, this is going to suck. Like, she's totally going to think I'm a fucking asshole. I'm swearing a lot.
That's okay. No.
But it didn't keep
funny.
her from, she didn't dump me or anything, luckily.
Chicks dig scars. Yeah.
Maybe. Some of them, I guess.
It's wild. Yeah. I mean, you bring up this idea of, sort of the language of art and in some ways it was definitely seen as performance art, I think, or at least in a vernacular of that kind of thing. But I think it was also a zeitgeist or sort of a cultural signifier of this kind of language of violence in a creative expression.
Yeah.
And that would sort of be watered down and trickled down into something palatable or consumable, like Fight Club or something like that. But there was a higher level sort of thinking, and maybe, not as purely nihilistic or drug induced as like a G.G. Allen, but something a little bit more highbrow, but still in this, because the idea was, it was almost ironic that Eric, the youngest, smallest, most fragile person, was this type of Lilo and Stitch sort of monster that would come out and throw a kick drum at the wall or sort of explove. I
do kind of think that it was a lot of just like, it was almost like roughhousing. We were toddlers. we were adult side toddlers who were given very loud instruments and kind of knew how to play them. I think I could play pretty well. I think Hisham could play pretty well. And what we were able to do was play in the way that we needed to work for the songs that Bjorn was writing. Like, there would be times where Hisham and I would be like, we got this. We're the rhythm section. This is important. And then like I go out there and I would just be flailing around. I have no fucking idea if I was actually like playing anything in a translatable way that is music someone else could hear. But we were actually playing the songs. It's sort of like those. That's what we were writing. It sounded like chaos.
Yeah, that's It's interesting though, but I think, that the setup of, these, toddlers with instruments is sort of an important one to sort of see in hindsight, because versus something, like a Black Flag or sort of something in this punk rock tradition where you think of these, muscular men with their shirts off and mohawks and,
Oh yeah.
and this kind of thing of like, oh, we're tough guys out here. It was almost the opposite of that in some ways, which I think almost grants this, or it was seen as at the time of transgressive in some sort of way.
I think that we were all like, we weren't really like hardcore kids or noise kids. We were indie kids. We were into indie rock.
Right.
And somehow we were given like this crazy drug that was noise. And when we took it, we went really hard on it, and I feel like that's sort of, a lot of that was about like, that was the filter we were kind of placing on everything. I actually think that when we graduated from RISD and then we moved to New York, that was the thing really, other than the call of wanting to be like a painter and having this new relationship with my girlfriend, like being in New York, it didn't much sense, the language that we were speaking. It did for everybody else, but they had to also take it in a new direction. Like what they ended up becoming, what the Dice did on Beaches and Canyon, significantly different from what we were doing in Providence and the early days in Brooklyn. There's something about it feeling like more professional when we got here, and like having to book clubs and do like a more political sort of and responsible version of what was like a music career would be. I was like, I don't want to do that. That doesn't seem fun. So I think there was a number of factors for why I left. It was like personal relationship. It was creative differences sounds too significant, but just kind of like for whatever reason, I couldn't click with it as much as I had been previously.
Well, and it's interesting too. I mean, just to see the creative pursuits that you executed after, where it was almost like, if I'm going to be a professional artist, this is how if I have to be a grown up, mature person, this is what this mature person would look like. I can't necessarily see this, pathway forward of toddler spasms being.
I mean, I'm not sure if like describing my career or my way of handling things as being professional is much better now. But I think it's sort of like the path makes more sense to me. Like, I think as social as I am, as much as I like to like go to shows and see, hang out with people, go to parties, whatever, I also really like the reliability of coming into a studio, knowing what I'm going to work on, having a plan for what I'm going to work on this week, next week. And when we would go on the road, I've really like missed having like regular painting practice or like studio time, which I'd already sort of established from 4 years of being in art school. So I felt a bit of like a withdrawal or something. I found that being on the road was super, super fun, but also pretty exhausting. And then when I was in the band before, the Dice ended up playing quite long sets. Like, we drive for fucking 9 hours and we play for 15 minutes. And I was like, this sucks. So like, I didn't have the patience to let it grow into something new.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. I mean, you were applying something that was akin to logic to this thing that was maybe had no business being in the consideration of art. That's incredible. So then after, well, let me think, did I kind of get to I think we sort of, addressed the idea of sort of like noise and violence in this way that I think, again, in talking about this time, I guess I'm fascinated, or just sort of, I feel the hindsight, allowing some, clarity and vision for it. I mean, but what in terms of that particular thing, like how do you reflect back on that? Was it necessarily not that you need to point a roadmap to these were the influences or the reasons or the responses to what was happening culturally writ large, but I mean, if you had to sort of encapsulate it for a time and place, why that particular
Why did it happen?
style expression or that? Yeah. I mean, what would you, could you relate
I feel like I think that Lightning Bolt was so like such a potent and powerful band, right? And they were so capable. Like those guys are incredible musicians. And the way that we could kind of put on a show that was not necessarily equal to them in any way, but maybe also a sort of spectacle was to perform this kind of like out, like no stage, we're coming at you, we're coming into your space. And that was our way of elevating the music and the live performance into something else, because we weren't going to be able to play like those guys, you know, like Hisham actually can probably play to a similar level of intensity as Chippendale now. And he's been playing for like 30 years or whatever. He's incredible. But I think that was our way of compensating for some other things that were probably missing. Like there was no hooks. There's nothing for the audience to get excited about or like, oh, you're going to play that song again? Maybe somebody felt that way when they saw one of our shows, but I think generally it was like, oh, what's going to happen this time? And that we had that too.
Yeah.
You know, like I think there were probably some shows we actually like played very, I would say, calm comparatively, and it wasn't that much fun. I don't know how to just I don't know what was going through our heads. I don't think any of us really can remember or know. It was of the moment, and it seemed like it was a signature thing that was unique to us, more or less, even though other people had certainly touched on that type of thing.
Yeah. And I guess that's about what I'm imagining too. There was almost this type of like centeredness or nowliness, like of just being very present, and if the band is of that kind of way of really being in their skin and exploding in a way that also put the audience in high alert, and almost kind of like switching your logical brain off or your sort of critic brain off, and now you're in this fight or flight sort of scenario, which as an art experiment there's many reaction, or there's many like stimulus that's happening at once to that. But the idea of switching the brain off, I think, as being able to engage your audience in a way that would put them in a elevated state of awareness. You know, I think it was something that, you know, many artists had done, and, you know, to the, you know, going back to a Warhol sort of happening sort of idea, as far back to, you know, anything else, to kind of caveman lizard brain, almost sacrifices, you know, of this sort of thing of like entertainment as, you know, just sort of spectacle and Romans and, you know, Christians and lions, or something. This kind of public execution is almost a way of that bloodlust, I think, tapping into that, but being presented and as art, or by these art students, or in this kind of very DIY spaces, is sort of got everybody shaken up, rather than having somebody get up there and do their best Kurt Cobain sort of impersonation, or their Sonic Youth impersonation, or their, you know, Jeff Buckley impersonation, or whoever, you know what I mean, of key, an Elliott Smith kind of scenario, or this kind of slowcore, or the other things that were sort of the culture of that time. Yeah.
I think it's also like, we certainly, I think, enjoyed the fact that we looked one way and then performed another way. Like that was, it wasn't a gag, but it was definitely like, I'm still somebody who, I don't want someone to be able to, I don't want to put up too many signifiers that somebody looks at me and they can immediately like know everything about me.
You're a metal guy, you're a punk guy, you're a skater guy, you're a graffiti guy, you're a hip hop guy.
I want to be like vanilla looking, and then have an opportunity to like, you know, either share those things when I want to, or not share those things if I don't want to. Like, I'm fine with being misread. I actually think that in general, when things are sort of misunderstood, there used to be like a positivity to that. Now I feel like contentiousness about language and representation and all this stuff, that I like when things get confused. I think it's very satisfying. I think that there's poetry that can happen when somebody else misunderstands someone else. Literally just in like wordplay, or just like, I know for a fact that one of the things that was happening with us is we were hearing about other bands who were, going crazy on stage. And then we were like, oh, we could try to go crazy. Went crazy in a different way than they did,
Mm-hmm. And rather than wearing
So-
masks or dressing up as some kind of kaiju creatures and some of these other performances that were happening with other contemporary artists at the time, it was almost like dress as, street clothes, and then the performance
were
goes
like,
crazy.
We were all Peter Parker. That's what it was. Everybody was in like their sort of like vanilla clothes, or their like, dirty art school kid clothes. But then what happened was,
you became Spider-Man without
the
Venom.
Costume. We became
Venom. That's it. Yeah, Carnage. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think that sort of helps. I think just in some ways, and not that necessarily, it needs to be explained, but I think in really, tackling the art or getting to the emotional sort of side of it. I think it's one thing to, I could imagine somebody who's unfamiliar with it hearing, two men in their 40s go, oh yeah, we were crazy when we were your age. We used to do it. But it's like, but why? My hope would be, I guess, in the sense of like translating this through the mist of time to at least to dial in something in the heart and mind that was so exciting and so visceral. There was that kind of like body sort of immediate heightened state of awareness, but then there was this intellectualism of it as well that was sort of this like, this is cool. There was a hip factor to it as well, and that's hard to sort of quantify. That's so much based on content or context of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it was cool and wild, and you had to be there. That was the other thing too. It wasn't it wasn't on VHS, or it wasn't on TV, or it wasn't, the underground felt dangerous in that kind of way that hadn't really.
I mean, I feel like I don't have the sensation of being an audience member for Black Dice, but I do for like every other Providence band, right? Like I remember the band that really was the one that kind of floored me the most initially was Force Field. It was just like a frequency that they were playing in and messing around with that somehow physically like connected with me. And there is that, as you're saying, like the when you have to be aware of yourself as an audience member. And I'm not saying that we were even smart enough to think about this. I probably I'm sure that I wasn't. But there's something cool and very like interactive when you are at a concert and you have to make sure that you are like safe, or that you are feeling comfortable, or you know where to be. I think that there's always some version of that when you're at a live show. Like you can stand in certain places because you want to hear the vocals better, or you want to hear the drums more, or whatever it is. Or you're just bummed because you have shitty seats behind somebody, or you're standing behind a super tall guy. Like there's so many ways to be aware of being an audience member. But I think that all of us, because we were playing with this sort of like type of bands, we're always aware of there's something uncomfortable, but something powerful that's happening for everybody at this show. And I feel like, again, with Lightning Bolt, like it was basically like shows at Fort Thunder were shows. It was about the music, but it was also like a party. Like everybody was going there to hang out, and then the show would kind of break out in the middle of the party. The way that people used to dance to Lightning Bolt is the way that we performed as a band. We kind of we like switched that role. We were basically like freaking out and flailing and doing all this stuff. And that's the way people dance to Lightning Bolt. It's still sort of, I haven't seen Lightning Bolt play in years, but still, there was a certain point actually where I remember I stopped going to Lightning Bolt shows because they got so big that I couldn't be right up front. And I was like, fuck this, man. I don't, this sucks. I want to be in it.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to have your head next to the cymbals, the stack of cymbals that's crashing in your ears.
Exactly. Especially having seen, like we went on tour with them a bunch of times. Like having that experience, I'm not willing to do the like stand in the back of the crowd experience.
It's not the same. Yeah, it'll never be the same.
No.
Unless they're set up in the back of the crowd, you know, and played as soon
That's
as the
right.
last band hit their last note and then they exploded
And you
in the
happen
back
to
of the
be
room.
standing in the
Like,
right
oh
spot.
shit! Now the whole crowd turns and rushes into you.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's incredible. So tell me about you know, I'm going to condense the next 20 years into a
Sure.
much smaller period of time, if you don't mind. But tell me about you know the you know your painting career and creative pursuits and sort of where your journey took you
Sure.
after leaving the Dice.
So pretty much right after leaving the Dice, we were in Brooklyn. I was seeing all those guys all the time. Like I was still very friendly with everybody. There was tons of music happening in Brooklyn. And we were all friends with a lot of those people who were making stuff, and the Dice House kind of became a landing spot for a lot of people. Like the Rapture stayed there. A bunch of different bands who were touring would come in and stay or whatever. So there was still a lot of creative energy happening. But I really started focusing on painting. I think I had my first painting show in 2001. I was an artist assistant for the artist Alex Katz for a few years and learned a ton doing that. But then actually, like, the first show that I had, I sold out all the paintings, and I was like, well, this is fucking awesome. Like, this is all I ever wanted.
It's like,
And then,
I could do this for the rest of my life.
Overly ambitious. Yeah, exactly. I was like, it's going to be like this every single time now. And of course it hasn't been, but I've basically found ways to make money through commissions. Like, there was always a little bit of like a funny, sometimes I felt a little bit, even in a scene that is like so filled with outsiders that the Providence music scene was, I was like, I like traditional painting. I'm like a very academic in this types of stuff that I want to make. So I was always a little bit like, do they know? Do they know this? But so I really pursued figurative painting, representational painting. I've been showing for since 2001. I've had the good fortune of like having at least one show every year. I've had long stretches where I've made a lot of my income is from commissioned portraits and stuff, which I enjoy making, but can also be a bit of a pain in the ass because it's not just like make your own stuff and see what happens. You kind of have to deal with customers in a way that's a little bit unfamiliar, sometimes uncomfortable, but generally so nice that people would want to like hire me to do that. I feel very fortunate that that's something people would come to me, asking for. So I've always been painting, and I think a lot of the stuff that I thought about in art school and even in the Dice like informs the way that I think about my painting. Like, I don't necessarily feel like it's straight up like academic representational painting, or it has elements of like confused visuals. Like, I do a lot of paintings of my wife in a sun hat. I used to do a bunch of paintings of nudes behind a shower curtain. So there's like this always I like having to look past or look through something to try and figure out the form. And especially with the paintings that I'm making now, which are these sun hat paintings, there's dappled light on my wife's face. And there's something really exciting about fractured light describing a form and a face, and how do you deal with that disruption, but also like make it specifically a person in a specific place. So like that kind of bouncing back and forth between figuration and abstraction is actually, in a funny way, something that I was wrestling with even when I was in the Dice, and thinking about like music as like a composition, as a form, as a pop song. And then what we were doing with it, which was really just like pushing it into, sort of aggressive sounds, loud sounds, rhythm, whatever, like deconstructing it. So like, I do think that some of that still filters in the way that I think about stuff, even if my work ends up being a lot more traditional than what the dice do or did.
I think there's something, of hearing you speak about it and being familiar with your work where there's a wrestling with an abstraction, in a sort of form versus representation in that
Mm-hmm.
sort of way that I think there's also a lot of in the illustrations as well, like this flattening of things where there's, where there's a sense of obviously of shadow and realism and portraiture, then it's sort of in a traditional sort of two-dimensional way, but you seem to play with the depth or sort of a challenge of that sort of depth and lighting, and what is lighting instead of defining, like undefining and abstracting in some way, where normally you think of
right.
light would normally be in a photographic sense accentuated to make the background seem further away and the foreground pop out even more. And this, I'm doing hand motions in an audio medium, but defining depth of field, where I think yours is almost in some ways, the opposite of that, of this sort of this hyper flat and
thanks. I like that sort of that read on it. I think that's definitely like, my first instinct as an artist as a kid was comic books. So like there is a certain graphic flatness, and it's very much about line, and sort of like, I absolutely think that aesthetic has influenced like the way that I paint and the way that I think about whether or not I want a composition to be super dynamic or very like classic and still. Those things are in comic books, which is an amazing, like, it's amazing that language is there for kids and helps them get the like emotion or excitement of a story, even if they're not, even if it's sort of like a second read. That's not the initial thing. That might be like the story is what's really grabbing them, or the way that a guy has tons of muscles or whatever it is. It's nice to sort of have like a very basic art form be a thing that informed me from childhood through what I'm doing now. Like sometimes when I think about the way that I make stuff, it's just like I'm still somehow allowed to be the kid that I was when I was 12 or whatever. I'm just like obsessing over the same sort of shit and getting to mess around, and it just feels so super lucky.
It's great. Well, I think in some ways too, especially coming from a musical sort of background, it's what you turn up in the mix or what you turn down, or how you would mix a sound or a thing. A kick drum has a lot of low end information. However, it is the artist's choice or the creative, whether creative mixing or however, you can roll all that low end off, and now you're left with this clickety clackety sort of thing. And I think in some ways, even your visual art in that way of like, it's a face, but there is, I'm looking at the piece behind you as we talk, but there's things that are like, there's a lot of information in that particular painting that it has nothing to do with the face. There's the hat, the shadows, the glasses, you're kind of left with a nose and a mouth, and your brain instantly wants to say, this is a portrait. However, how much information is in that piece? It has nothing really to do with a face and the shadow and the relationship between woven and light refractions that taken upon their, if you were to edit that or if to crop that in any other way other than a portrait, traditional portraiture, it would be very abstract,
I think that's right. Actually, like thinking about it like a mix of a record is actually like a very accurate way of how I kind of approach a certain image. Like I will literally be like, I'm going to just take all the like contrast and get it real, like, so we're dealing with like a very low level of contrast and just see what happens. So basically, like, I find that often when I'm making a painting, it starts off where I've got a plan, and then slowly I have to let the painting sort of tell me what to do. And even if I have that plan where I'm like, I want it to be very low contrast, at a certain point, my eye will tell me like, all right, you've got it here and it's all working, but maybe this is the moment to break that plan and just see what, like, putting a big like black, line across the middle or whatever it might be. What will that do to it? And it just becomes a series of questions. And then finally, when I'm done asking those questions and the painting isn't asking me any more questions, I'm like, okay, I'm done. And it's a very like, so it's just like a play of, it's almost like improv, right? You got your scenario and then you say yes and yes and yes and until you finally are saying, we're done, we're out.
Yeah, I've answered all the questions, or any other questions that come up after this point are no longer interesting to me. I feel like
exactly.
Now is the time to walk away with the highest creative result yielded.
Exactly.
We've all stayed too long on a project and you go, it's just only getting worse. Every time I touch it, it gets 10 times worse exponentially each time I come back to this thing.
Every time I'm making a painting, what I most want is for it to look like it just happened. That it was something that existed before, and it almost like it couldn't have happened any other way. So
an inevitability of existence.
And if I can have that, if I can have it look like it's sort of like first touch, last touch, then I'm very satisfied. That doesn't always happen, obviously, but that's kind of the goal.
Some intentionality to it. No, I feel like it's I think there's a lot of relevance or parallels in sort of the abstract, sort of music or noise music and those sort of ways of setting up a scenario and then touching it just enough to where it feels like it's doing its own thing. Like I find myself a lot of times in scenarios of making sort of abstract or ambient music that I make on my own, of letting it sort of answer itself, sort of setting up a scenario, whether it's through feedback or through note relationships, and letting it sort of play and do what it's going to do, and then leave it alone, and then just kind of be able to then not fuck with it anymore. Because the more I touch it, that is just like, now it became a blues jam. God damn it.
The cool thing about music though, versus like, painting, is you can start like another version of the same, you can just take like the things you have, make a new folder, whatever, or make a new session,
save as.
Exactly. Right. It's like a very like, I wish that painting had that. And there are like, you could do printmaking, you do it with drawing. Painting is really like the object becomes the record of all of your choices, and there's no Apple Z. There's no like going back. There's the edits are like plain and naked, which is exciting, but
I like this idea though too. I mean, obviously, you're not telling you what to do, but this idea of if you were to save as, I mean, whether it be through photography or print or somehow capturing the stage along the way and go, this was fine. However, I want to do something really fucked up next. You know what I mean? It almost could be a series or a particular type of zine, or maybe not something as involved as a fully realized painting, but maybe something along the line of saving as you go. And then presenting those in a way that in which it would progress from less interesting to more interesting to too far interesting, allowing yourself that type of what would happen if kind of feeling, and letting go. Because I find myself doing that a lot with mixes, and 90% of the time, the wilder I go, the version 7 or 8 is the final one. I'm happy that I made all those decisions, but I let go. I had one for safety. Rarely go back to safety. Usually, but what that does is really allow me as a composer, as a mixer, as anything, as a musician, to then I have this weird thought. I really now want to just completely delete all the drums and really just focus on this one weird thing. And then I'm going to loop that for the next 10 minutes, And so there was a song there. There was a traditional song. How now we've gone into this type of looped, abstraction. And then I'll take 30 seconds of that and then loop that again. Then you find yourself, you walked your way down into this abstracted sort of noise hole. And that's probably better than whatever that thing was that began, and I don't necessarily know if it's showing your cards or like a magician, showing how the trick is done. If I were to present each of those variations, but sometimes I think about it and go, it's kind of interesting. Hopefully I don't come off as being too cloying or patting myself on the back of being so clever. I think there's just something about hiding your work sometimes in that regard that you don't want to show off.
But I do think there's some of both. Like I definitely want to look like I'm making stuff and it's easy, right? Because that somehow feels like you've accomplished, or you're like raising your craft level or whatever.
Sure.
But I also love and appreciate any artist that's willing to expose like their failures. And maybe it goes back to the idea of like sometimes you need to, the miscommunication or the misstep can teach you so much, or lead to like poetry or whatever, and or surprises that you never expected. I love David Bowie, and like, you know, he was obsessed for years with David Bowie. One of the things I find so fascinating about David Bowie, though, is before he like really hit his stride, he spent years making some of the worst music and creative decisions that were just like, how is this happening? Where he is like, studied to be a mime. He was trying to be a mod. He like released, I don't know if you know that song, The Laughing Gnome. Do you know that one?
No.
Oh my God. You got to look it up. It is just bizarre. It's basically like it sounds like it's a novelty record. And in it, he has a conversation with a little gnome that he sees along the side of the road. And it's, you know, sped up vocal. It's his vocal sped up to sound like a gnome. And he's having a back and forth conversation. Exactly. So there's like just the fact that you can know that someone who had so much creative genius and so much energy and made so many things that affected the world in a wonderful way can also make one of the stupidest, crappiest songs you'll ever hear. And that I think is the greatest gift an artist can give, other than the like, you know, the real pinnacle of what they're doing, the fact that they can show like, hey, look, keep at it, and
the confidence to fail in
there.
public. Yeah, I mean, he has this famous clip that's gone around for the last few years, you know, especially after his passing, that was about, you know, this creative sort of risk taking, where he says, you know, if you find yourself in comfortable waters creatively, go a little bit further out, and then go a little bit further out, right till your toes can't touch, then go out just a little bit more where you can't touch and where you're scared. It's like, then you're in a good place creatively. And
but
that's sort of that idea.
If you're a gnome, you can't go that far out.
That's true. What would the gnome do? What would David's gnome do?
He's treading water almost instantly.
Wow. So that's interesting. If you're not very intelligent or very creative, the world is all very creatively scary place.
Yeah.
Well, then I think we get into a new metal, then where everything's very profound in a way that. Whoa! What if we did a chug apart with some record scratches? Could that creatively be? You know, the thing that I've often found, and maybe I'm just talking shit now at this point, but. Most music, and especially in a pop world, music is successful when the performer who's performing the music really believes in it. You know, really makes you feel that they believe it. And what that has taught me is that many of these pop performers are not very intellectual or very emotionally mature, because they really mean this horribly vapid, very shallow music, and they believe it, and they can sell it very strongly. You know, that's a bit of the creative gnome syndrome.
Yes, you're right. So it's like, it's easy to commit if you've only got a limited range of thought.
And also your ability to blanket that message authentically and them, you know, if you can convey very simple ideas very heartfelt and authentically, you could probably appeal to lots of people. Yeah. But you know, I think in some ways, again, not to dislocate my shoulder, patting ourselves on the back, you know, having read a book, at least a book, or maybe, you know, God forbid, 2 books, you may start to find yourself a little bit bored or a little bit more challenged and looking for art that sort of asks other questions. And then you find yourself in a very unprofitable creative space.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's also something like so admirable for the like dedication and work ethic of some of these pop stars, though. Like there's some they're just there for like a minute, and they're just, you know, along, happy to be on a ride, and then it's over. But like I could never do it. I couldn't even do it on the most basic like indie, you know, with so little responsibilities. It also meant that there wasn't a lot of money coming in from it. Sure. But it's still it's a hard life. And like, I think that there's so much also sort of like complication involved in becoming more and more famous. And like the criticism now that people get is just unrelenting. It's like, let these people, if they're going to make crap and they're happy doing it, let them do it. You know, like,
right.
Why is there so much hate online for someone who's singing a love song? It's like, who cares? People have been doing that for years.
Well, then you're in this dialogue of persona and celebrity and sort of what an audience needs from that, and the bloodlust of being recognized outside of yourself. You know what I mean? You've in essence opened yourself up to some type of like factory farming situation where how much can you cut off of yourself and still retain any sort of sense of self?
Is that like that's
like
part of Hollywood though, right? Like,
absolutely.
It's like
it's the part of Hollywood. It's it's the main factory that it runs off of, and being able to oh god, there's a great line of this. What authenticity is the best lie you can tell, or something like, what I mean? Authentic is the biggest magic trick, that you get away with, and meaning that no one's ever really that authentic. But if you can fake being authentic, you got it down.
Right. Well, that's what art is, all artifice, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what the word comes from. So like, there's always somehow using the lie to reveal the truth.
It's a better way of saying it.
It's a really like tricky thing to then try and figure out who's lying in what the truth is. The truth valuable or more valuable from one person than it is from the other if they're revealing it through their art. Do you know what I mean? Like there certainly is. There's definitely people who are better at making music and better at making paintings and but there's always someone else who it doesn't relate to. So they have to look and find that lie that someone else has told, which gives them whatever feeling art gives to people. I feel like I got a little bit confused in what I'm trying to say here.
No. I think I'm following you, because I think of someone like an Andy Warhol, you know what I mean, which were one of our bigger celebrity, liars of the artistic, sort of intention. But something like these printmaking and again talking about celebrity and like what is a bad silkscreen print of Marilyn Monroe really mean? You know what I mean? There's it's not real, obviously. It's not even manufactured by the art, in some of these ways. But it's a comment on the artificialness of celebrity and these kinds of in persona and personality, these types of things. So finding the most insincere way to represent something that's very well known, and how far can you abstract this thing and still retain its sense of recognizability,
But at the same time, like, I think that Warhol was really sincere about his like detachment. You know what I mean? Like, he loved those things, and there is real manipulation in in making the image that like shows craft. But I know what you mean. All at the same time, like, there's so much of. I think a lot of what happens even with Warhol is he's distilled down to like these like. The 15 minutes of fame his association with like stardom and his hunger for stardom and his attraction to stardom. Like, it clouds maybe a little bit of what the actual objects are that he made, some of which are very beautiful, some of which, I mean, he made so much. Like, there's a lot of crap and there's a lot of great stuff.
He's up there with the Beatles in a way where he defined a new genre or even a new reading of old genres. You know what I mean? Where there's like, it's hard to even criticize it because it's in essence became the reader, the basic filter in which to view so much of other people's art. So, it becomes almost critic proof in some regards, similar to like a Beatles thing, or, where you're like, is this even a good song anymore? It doesn't matter. It's a Beatles song. Therefore it's
like the Rosetta Stone sort of like, it allows you to understand other things because it's like the first source.
It becomes exactly. It's the filter that everybody else is used. So then it's what it's judged against, But the other thing we don't have to keep going down this road, but I'm curious, or as thought about when you said about, about the lie that's told, as I think about in screenplays or in film or in script writing, the worst thing you can do is have the characters say what they're actually feeling or meaning. You know what I mean? The best way to convey love is not to have a man, come up to a woman actor on stage or in film and say, "I love you."
Right.
The best way, to convey that feeling of love is he'd look at her and then look away back at his shoes and then, catch her eyes again and then, try to approach her and then he can't approach her and then he ends up walking away. And they both walk away from each other and you go, wow, that they must really love each other. You're like, but they didn't say they loved each other. If anything, they did the exact opposite. They agreed to never see each other ever again. They had so much said, I hate you, never talk to me again. They run away from each other and you go, ooh, there's so much passion in this. I feel the fire in this, thing where you don't want your characters to speak the truth. You want them to be able to lie, that allows you to, or even if it's a sad scene and seeing an actor on stage crying is cheap.
Right.
An audience won't cry on that. They'll have pity, but seeing an actor try not to cry, and then everybody's in that spot like, oh, I'm not crying either. No, you're crying. I'm not crying. Seeing somebody holding those tears back is somehow more sad. And so it's this type of stuff, this representation, that you see as art, that actually hits something that you don't want to feel or you don't want to outwardly express.
Yeah, and I think that's actually something that I always look to art and film and music for, is like sometimes you're feeling something, but you can't quite either figure it out or release it. And when you are somehow come across the right piece of music or the right film, or even for some like myself, the right painting, it is giving you the tool to express and feel a certain way that you already feel, but you can't quite open up. And those things, that's what I really feel like art is for. It's to help people open up to the emotions and thoughts that they're already having. It's a facilitator.
I love it. Yeah. I'm with you. All right. Well, I kept you far too long, Sebastian. You were very generous with your time.
Oh man, thank you so much for having me. If you want to keep going, I'm happy to keep going.
Well, I think this is great. I think at some point our audience is going to be running for the hills.
We call that boredom.
Oh, boredom. Okay.
Yeah.
No,
which some people say is a great thing.
Not that this is a boring conversation at all. No, I've learned over this year and a half of doing this show that all of my greatest fears are the things that everybody tells me are why they love this, why they love the show, I'm just like, oh God, okay. I'm just going to come off like two white guys in their 40s talking about the good old days. And that's the idea.
I think I learned about the show because Bjorn posted that he was in it. And then I was like, oh, this is like perfect show for me. It's like indie guys talking about indie stuff, punk, skateboarding, music. Like, okay, great.
Yeah, it's right up my alley. I know that. This is the show that I would listen to. These are the shows I do listen to. So
exactly,
it's good. I just want to add this voice to the tap show. No. Well done to you, Sebastian. Thank you so much for coming on. And then where do you want people to find out more about you if they're curious and if we've not bored them to tears yet and they're still here?
Yeah.
Where can they learn more about you?
I have a couple of solo records out that are on like Apple Music and Spotify and stuff like that. I have an Instagram page, but like I'm feeling very low energy about that, mostly because of the state of the world and all the crap surrounding social media. But I'm actually having a painting show that opens January 30th in New York City at a gallery called Miles McHenry Gallery. So next week, I'm having a show. If someone happens to be in New York and wants to see it, there it is.
Awesome. Great. And then you also have a website as well, right?
I do. Sebastian Blanck, BLANCK.com.
Great. And can people order commissions there as well? I imagine those commissions would be exciting.
I don't usually do commissions through that because... Well, in part because I have to. Most commissions are local because I take the photos myself, and it's just like a But yes, that, if somebody's really interested, they could email me, and then maybe we can see what happens. But it really is dependent on geography in a big way.
Got it. studio@sebastianblanck.com is the way to get a hold of you with that. So if you're on the East Coast in the New York area and would like to order a commission, that is an option.
Wow, this is like the closest thing to advertising that I've ever been a part of.
Hey, why not? It's at the end of an hour of an hour and a half. If we're here,
you can have 10%.
Yeah, this is you've earned it. You've paid in. This is why you get the 10% discount off if you've made it this far and are still interested. Please go order a print or go order a commission. An original. Awesome, Sebastian. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Randy.
Take care. Be well. Yes, there he is. Awesome. Thank you much, Sebastian. Thank you. I'm tripping over my hot dog. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for coming on. And it was great talking, catching up, and chewing the fat. And everybody go to sebastianblanck.com to buy some art, see some art, purchase some art. All the good things that you want to do with art. You could, if you're in the New York area or East Coast area, you could even commission art. Imagine that. You can also follow him at Sebastian Blanck on Instagram. That's SEBASTIANBLANCK. Or you can hit the links down in the show description below. You can also go to distrokid.com/VIP/hyphenate to get 30% off uploading your music to all the streaming things. If you are so inclined and want to do that, you can also write to me at hyphenate@gmail.com. Let me know what you think of life, what you think of this show, what you think of your own show, what do you think of your music. I want to hear your bands. You could be like the cool band, that you are, and send me cool stuff. And we will talk about it here on the episode. So thank you, everyone. It's been a fun February, second month of 2025. We are getting through this thing together as a community, sharing our life and our journeys and our hopes and our dreams and our experiences, strength and hope that'll get us through anything. We can do it as a community. I love you guys. Thank you for all of the awesome feedback and all the fun stuff and all just the cool, creative people that you are, making rad stuff and keeping on, man. I hope you're having a good time folding your laundry, walking the dog, doing the dishes, driving about town, taking care of errands, doing all the things that we do when we listen to podcasts. There's some things I do. I'm listening to podcasts. It keeps me company as I'm bopping about throughout the town and the day. Just passing time with the friends. All right. Be well. I will see you on Monday. Have a good weekend. And, I'll be back on Monday with Aaron, catching in, catching up, catching in, catching out, catching all the things we do. All right. Bye.
Always look to art and film and music for is like sometimes you're feeling something, but you can't quite either figure it out or release it. Somehow come across the right piece of music or the right film, or even for some like myself, the right painting. It is giving you the tool to express and feel a certain way that you already feel, but you can't quite open up. And those things, that's what I really feel like art is for. It's to help people open up to the emotions and thoughts that they're already having.